Hello and welcome to In the Picture. This is Miles Cardan, and joining me today is Shane Jones.
Yo.
We're switching things up a little bit this time around. Instead of looking at the present, we are going into the past and looking at some beloved classics and films that we grew up loving from our childhood. And we are asking the question, does it hold up? The movie we just watched was The NeverEnding Story. Came out all the way back in 1984, which makes it 34 years old. So this was an effects-heavy fantasy film that many of us have seen a long time ago. I think Shane and I were saying, I know it's been about 18 years probably since I last saw it.
Yeah, I mean, we both kind of see vivid pictures of it when we think about the movie, but we don't really remember it a whole lot.
Like I remember the sequel more than I remember the first one, because I think that was when I had access to. So we just watched it, and we would encourage you to go out and watch it, or you can just listen and see what we think. There may be some mild to significant spoilers, so listen at your own risk. If going back and watching The NeverEnding Story sounds like something you want to do. But basically, when we ask, like, what does it hold up? Well, what does that exactly mean? It's basically like effects obviously aren't going to hold up that great, but we can at least answer, like, does it distract or take away from the story? Also, some stories don't age well. Like, if you look at, like, a lot of comedies and jokes, like, it can be very sexist or even racist sometimes. And just, like, sometimes things don't age well in terms of trends and stories. So we're going to see how the story holds up. Can this still appeal to adults? Can you show it to your kid, your 6-7-year-old or whatever? How does this compare to movies today, kids' movies today? And but we're going to start out basically, what were our expectations going into this? Shane, how are you expecting to respond to this?
I mean, I was just picturing a kid's movie going into it, something that wouldn't really translate to me as an adult. I don't remember the special effects being what I just saw. I thought they were going to kind of look cheesy and old, like the old 80s movies and stuff like that. And as well as I just kind of thought the acting was going to be cheesy. Some of the kid actors aren't quite up to par as they are today and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, I felt like some of the acting took away more than some of the dated effects at times. For the most part, like, a lot of the set pieces held up, not all the time, but most of the time. And just the way that you can kind of see how these were put together, it's very creative. I mean, nothing's really done with the computer at this point. It's all, like, 99% of it, I'd say, is like everything's captured in camera. The combination of, like, rear screen projections, and there were models and miniatures. So that was a lot of fun. The story, for those who don't know, it takes place, basically, we're introduced to this young kid, Bastian, in some city, middle of the 1980s. He's kind of on his own. He was raised by his dad because his mom has passed away, and he has to deal with bullies on his way home from school. And he ends up taking refuge in this bookshop where this kind old man tells him about this book, and then the kid goes and takes the book and takes it up to his the attic at his school, and just gets lost in the story up there. And that's kind of where this movie really takes off. He's reading this story, and then you just see the story that he's engaged in. My first impression was, like, because they drop you in there and there's those creatures, I was like, oh goodness. Just like, it was like right off the bat, like the snail, I was like, oh boy. Like, but that was kind of the exception I found. Like, a lot of like I just said before, like, a lot of the effects, and especially when they get to the palace, like a lot of the creatures, like the people with the two faces and those like giant heads and everything. Like a lot of that was pretty cool. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's such a consistency between the practical creature effects and the painted backgrounds and the practical sets that um, I didn't really think there was anything really cheesy. They all kind of fit the tone of that movie. And I mean, if you were to take any of those characters and put them in a modern movie, yeah, they would look cheesy. But it was just the whole consistency of the tone of that movie is what made them kind of timeless to me.
I would say, well, most of that holds up. Probably the one thing that didn't and the one thing that dates a lot of movies, especially from the 80s, is the music.
Yeah.
Like there are a few times where the music kicks in and tries to be like really epic, and it's just the most cringeworthy like 80s,
Yep.
like over the top soundtrack that you can imagine. That's probably the thing that dates this the most.
Well, yeah, that's how the movie starts, and that's what instantly was like, oh, here we go. It's gonna be one of those cheesy 80 movies when they're just like the never-ending story. It's nothing but backgrounds of clouds and that song playing for a couple minutes. And yeah, I mean the soundtrack fits that kind of sound for the whole movie, and that's probably the one takeaway that I have. The negative part, like Miles, is yeah, that soundtrack is very dated.
But it's used sparingly. I mean, it only comes in like maybe 3 or 4 instances.
Right, yeah. Well, yeah, it's the scenes that are pretty quiet that I kind of I was kind of taken away by that. There's a lot of movies where I'm just like, this scene needs to have some kind of peace in the background, but there's a lot of scenes in this movie that work perfectly just fine without anything going on, just relying on the sound effects and everything.
Yeah, and the visuals. I mean, the sets that they built are amazing. There was one scene that we came across, and like we were just like, "Oh yeah." Shane, do you want to introduce that one?
Yeah, I mean, as soon as Atreyu and Artax, the horse, start walking in that swampy area with the quicksand looking stuff, we instantly got that kind of childhood trauma thrown back at us. The scene where Artax just decides to be depressed and sink into the sand there, or whatever it was, the mud.
Yeah, there's some very like on the nose. I don't know what you call messages, I guess. Just like how it's like, oh, if this, don't let the sadness overtake you, or you'll sink into the swamp. Kind of, and it, this film was way more like meta and like just an overall commentary on fiction in general than I ever thought it was going to be. Like coming back and rewatching it, like that's something that as a kid like you aren't going to pick up on, and I just had no idea there was like that level of commentary going on. So I was kind of pleasantly surprised by that, and just as an adult was something that I was able to appreciate.
Well, yeah, it's this scene that's like a perfect example, as well as like the wolf, of what I like about these older family movies is, I mean, they really don't give a shit. They're just like, oh, these kids can handle it. Let's just put some traumatic moments in these movies, which really kind of makes it a family movie rather than a kid movie. Is you have these like rough, hard themes to watch as a kid, but like families or adults could appreciate it, I guess, and relate to it. So it kind of draws everybody in, even though it may have given us some childhood trauma growing up.
And to add to that, like if you just look at the aesthetic, like, the scenes, they're dark, kind of grimy. You've got that film grain, in there as well. The kid's falling in the mud, and he's just like covered in mud. Later on he gets like a gash across his chest, and he's, there's blood, and it's like, for kids or a family movie, like that's pretty gritty. I was gonna say, are there any examples like of family movies today or kids movies today that are comparable to that, or do you think that it's just been completely watered down?
Nah, for the most part, it is pretty watered down. They kind of censor blood and violence. Like they cut away from the screen anytime somebody gets has some kind of involvement with violence, or with the exception of maybe the Pixar movies. Every once in a while, they throw in some kind of like in Up when the old guy like hits that contractor guy with his cane and like hits him, puts a big like bloody mark on his cheek, like stuff like that. But with the exception of the Pixar movies, with just barely.
I mean, but they're not. I mean, they don't
that.
ever really go really dark. I mean, they'll have their sad moments. Like,
Yeah.
I'd be a liar if I said I didn't tear up at a certain moment in Inside Out.
Right.
But like, they're never really like dark or scary.
No.
And there's never like, I wouldn't ever describe Pixar as like being gritty.
Right, and that's what I was kind of saying is what I like about these older family movies is they are not afraid to do that. But yeah, I kind of get what you're saying. The modern movies have kind of censored that. I think they're
And it's kind
afraid to show it.
Yeah, it's kind of across the board. Like, especially in the 70s, like you could have brief non-sexual nudity and the film would still earn a PG rating.
Yeah.
You'd never see that happen today.
Well, I mean, look at Gremlins or Jaws. Those are PG movies, and there's a lot in those.
Yeah, a lot of blood in Jaws.
Yeah, I was just on I was just on a flight back from Chicago, and I watched Gremlins, and I was just super surprised at how graphic that movie was for a PG kids movie. It's just like, wow, I don't remember it being like this. It was Jing.
Do you think that's good or bad that movies have, or I guess movies aimed at younger audiences have gotten softer? Do you think that's good or bad?
I think it really hurts the family movie genre. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to, and they're just like, "Oh, I'm not going to see that kids movie," and I'm just like, "It's Pixar. They're like top quality. You gotta like this movie." They're like, "It's a kids movie. I'm not gonna watch it," and I think a lot of that comes from them being afraid to kind of show that violence and stuff. That's real world stuff that we see.
Yeah, it's kind of like a reflective of the era. Like back here, I mean, you have parents of all different kinds. Now I'm getting way off on a tangent here, but kind of the free roaming kid, like that wasn't a taboo. That was fine. It's like, okay, Mikey, go off and be home from school by this time. Good luck. Avoid the creepy people, please.
Yeah.
Don't talk to strangers. But now it's like parents are like, oh, nope, you better be on that bus and you better be home at this time, or I'm coming to pick you up because you ain't walking the 10 blocks alone. It's kind of a different mentality nowadays. And I think the movies kind of have, been a reflection of that as well. Just kind of what they include and what they don't include, like kind of the overprotectiveness of a lot of parents nowadays. Like, I don't know if you follow Brad Bird on Twitter, but people have been like, parents have like been confronting him on Twitter because apparently there's some, what they said were like curse words that were in The Incredibles 2. And I don't even remember, like, there's nothing that stuck out. So the only thing I can think is, oh, maybe a character said damn or something. And there's like, there's people that are freaking out over that. And it's like, are you kidding me?
Well, yeah, I mean, like, what? Raiders of the Lost Ark was PG too. It's just, we kind of become too protective. Like, I could only imagine if this NeverEnding Story were to come out today, how many people would boycott that horse scene. Mm-hmm. It's just, that would be too much for a family movie today. But yeah, I mean, without bringing politics and such into this episode, yeah.
I mean, like, there's later on, there's the two like guardian statues, and they're like, and they have these like big busts on them, like with nipples and everything, and I just thought like, oh, that's not something you'd see in a kids movie today.
No, like, funny you talk about that. I remember being in like 5th grade, and my teacher was showing us some art movies, and he would fast forward through all the scenes that had like nudity in their art. That's what it's kind of become.
Definitely. So with that said, I mean, this is definitely aimed at a younger audience, this film, when it came out. I mean, the protagonist in it is like 10, 12, somewhere around there. Like, he's pretty young.
Yeah.
So like that's the age that it's aimed at. Would you still recommend this film for kids of that age?
Yeah, I definitely recommend it for kids. Some of the things that I wouldn't recommend it to an adult for, maybe just like all those cutaways that they had to the kid reading the book. I thought a good, I don't know, 80% of those were pretty awful.
We cracked up at a couple of them.
Yeah.
Just kind of how blunt they were.
Right. And kids, I think this movie would get away with that with kids. But yeah, this is kind of one of those timeless stories that you could just show any generation coming up or now or whenever. I can't see this movie getting too old to watch.
Yeah, me neither. And I think kids especially are a lot more forgiving, especially when you have so much going on, like dragons and giant rock monsters and all, and goblins. Like, kids are gonna love that. As an adult, I think who doesn't have the nostalgia factor to kind of fall back on, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for them. I don't think they'd find it, and there's just, unless just out of mild curiosity, like they hadn't seen a lot of special effect heavy movies in the 80s and just kind of curious, like, oh, what does that look like? Otherwise, I don't think that they would really find much there that they would like, unless they were just like a super hardcore fan of the fantasy genre. Then I could see them like finding something out of it. But I think the story holds up. Like I said, there's kind of another level to this story that goes beyond, I think, anything a younger viewer is going to understand. And as an adult, I think they can appreciate that, even if not like the whole picture. So yeah, for me, I would say this actually holds up quite well, especially if I'm looking at it through the eyes of, like my 8 to 12-year-old self. I think if I was 12 years old right now in 2018, I think I would love this movie.
Right. Yeah, I'm right there with you. Especially if you're somebody that thinks CGI is dumb and you don't understand it very well and think practical effects are the way movies should go forever and the entire movie should be practical. This is a pretty good example of the creativity that a lot of those older movies that didn't have very good special effects like CGI could make, because they just had to. Yeah, I mean, if you're a big Jim Henson fan, I don't think he has any involvement with this movie, but it feels like that, and I think you'll enjoy this movie quite a bit. And I enjoyed this movie as a kid, and I still enjoy it now, even though I haven't seen it since today for a long time. And yeah, I think it holds up pretty well. Yeah,
I have to say I was thoroughly entertained as well. It's not a perfect film, but it's, for the fantasy genre, it's pretty darn good. So that, I think, concludes our first episode of Does It Hold Up? We have a bunch more of these planned. We're going to try and target films that took place it's mostly basically before 2000. And we may even have some polls where you get to choose which movie we talk about. And then Shane do you want to save that announcement for later, or do you want to tell them what you have up your sleeve?
Oh yeah, I mean, I could just tell you now to the 5 people that are probably listening to this. I'm going to work my best on trying to bring my favorite horror recommendations to you in a complete show just dedicated to horror and the movies that I enjoy most. So that'll be a separate episode. We're kind of revamping ourselves in a way that we're going to give you more than just reviews. Like my horror show is not going to be just reviews. It's going to be why this movie is cool and why you should watch it. Not necessarily reviewing things. As well as this show, like we're going to try not to just review things with this within the picture. We're going to share what we love with you, or I mean, I guess if it doesn't hold up, what you should avoid, or maybe just watch again to see if you agree with us. But yeah, that's one of our few shows that we have planned for moving forward. And I know we took a big break in between last episode and this episode, but that was just so we could come back right and give you more of a show than just every single blockbuster movie that comes out, giving a review of that.
Yeah, so there it is. Hope you enjoyed listening, and we look forward to doing more of this in the future. This has been Miles Cardan.
And Shane Jones.
And this has been In the Picture. See you later, everybody.
Adios.